Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this learning experience brought to you by Huntress. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead, but before we dive right in, I have just a couple of notes I'd like to review with you. First of all, we are recording today's session, so if you happen to miss any of our session, if you'd like to watch again later, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving the recording via email shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you would like to engage with us, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first and the easiest option is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So when you find that chat tab, let us know from where in the world you are joining us today. Now, if you have any questions, we would like you to direct those questions to the Q&A tab on the right side of that chat section. And today, after we close things out, we will be reaching out to two lucky participants who were extra engaged in our session today, and we'll be sending out $50 Amazon gift cards to those two winners. So please take part in our conversation today. We love to have you with us. So our topic is financial impact of a threat. And I'm joined today by Marcos Torres, CFO at Huntress, and John Hammond, Principal Security Researcher at Huntress. So Marcos and John, thank you both so much for joining us today. John, do you want to go ahead and take it from here?
Marcos, how are you doing, my friend? I know, hey, we're bright and early for a bit of a Monday morning, but I guess we can dive into a little bit of the show if you're ready for it.
Absolutely. Let's make it happen, John. It's great being with you here and with all the attendees, especially with a lot of the stuff that we've seen out there in the financial world related to threats and incidents and whatnot. So happy to join you, and let's get on it.
Cool. So, hey, if I may, will just go super duper quick on the agenda, right? The obligatory outline, everyone has to have this for their slides. We'll go super duper quick because let's just get into it. But we'll do some super quick introductions, just the obligatory credibility slide, right? Then we'll talk about what we're seeing for current threats, what the landscape really looks like. And then, okay, maybe some of the tough pills to swallow, the hard truths, the cold hard facts, and the costs with that and what we can do about it. Then we'll dive into some Q&A because truthfully, we want to hear from you. It's always something to sort of think and guess and come up with, okay, maybe what you would like to hear about, but we won't know that until we get all here together with you. So please, please, please don't be shy. We'd love to see it in the chat. We'd love to see it in Q&A. Ask us whatever questions you'd like. We're here for you. So with that, let's cruise into those introductions because Marcos, I think you've got a little bit more to flaunt than I do, my friend. I can sing your praises forever, but I'll let you take it away.
Absolutely. No, thanks, John. And yeah, just quick background. This is not going to be here's 20 minutes of my resume or anything like that. But I am the finance leader over here at Huntress, finance and operations. And if you think about it, as a cybersecurity company, we also got to take care of a lot of things, legal, accounting, finance, all those things. But even beyond, checking the boxes and kind of like counting the beans out there, there's a bigger part of our job too, which is making sure that, we do our risk mitigation and, we have contracts, we have obligations, we have a lot of these things. So just as any other business, we need to take care of a lot of things to be in compliance. So I get to see and play both sides of this equation. On the one side, I'm responsible for a lot of these things at Huntress. On the other side, I get to see, what we build to make sure that folks can live up to their standards, their security, their compliance, and also sometimes, just like John, we get to see the ugly side when things happen, and we get to see sort of like the things that people should have done. And hindsight's always 2020. But the good thing about this meeting we have today is we get the chance to share with you sort of the rules of thumb, but also the things that others have not, sort of like looked out for. And this is all about community. This is about standing on everyone else's shoulders, learning from each other. And I've always been a big fan of getting those free lessons because you got to learn from somebody else's mistakes. And that's really the message here. We want to make sure that you get to see all the things that we see and get you thinking, get you ready for if or when something happens. So more than giving you a resume, it's more giving you sort of like where we come from, what we see, and hopefully you're better prepared for when an incident may happen or come your way.
Cool. Yeah, and hey, hello. My name's John. I'm one of the principal security researchers here at Huntress. So, truthfully, a little bit more of the geeky nerd, hey, computer side. I'm on the keyboard. I want to be slinging some code together. I want to be digging into malware and trying to understand what hackers are up to. So, if I may, I think we have a bit of a dynamic duo here because look, Marcos can cover a whole lot of the money side and finances, and I think hopefully I can bring to the table some more of those threats, those hackers, those malware and cybercrime that might be up in action. So with that, hey, you know what? Let's get the party started. Um, I'd love to chat a little bit about the threat landscape today. And if you don't mind, Marcos, I might pick your brain on this because I wanted to, if folks weren't aware, kind of put it on your radar. This is super duper recent, November 16th. I don't know if you can see the dates here, but there was a little bit of a headline because one of the ransomware gangs, hey, cyber criminal groups, some of those operations that go out and beat up computer networks and infrastructure and systems and take down organizations, companies, and businesses because they'll encrypt all of their systems. They'll, hey, make sure that all of the data is stolen, exfiltrated, and then oftentimes used for like blackmail and extortion, holding things for ransom, hence the name ransomware. Uh, and that's been a game of cat and mouse. We've all heard that forever. It's, kind of a recurring trend of a threat, but they oftentimes up the ante, whether it's double extortion, hey, whether they demand another payment, or whether they even don't give the data back even after a poor company has paid the ransom. But there's this one group. I don't know if folks are tracking Alf V or Black Cat. They've done a whole lot of innovative stuff recently, and that, oh, they've got some new modern encryptor for their cybercrime malware, the ransomware itself. But this is kind of a new technique, and I'm curious if we're going to see more of it, because Black Cat, this ransomware group, had compromised an organization, and there's no secret here. This is Meridian Link; it's all out and about. And not only did they, okay, encrypt all the data, steal the information, and start to publish it on the internet, but they took it one step further because the victim, Meridian Link, did not kind of file or report the incident with the Security and Exchange Commission. The hackers did it for them. They did it on their behalf. They went and voluntarily, hey, sent this notice to the SEC about the cyber incident and the breach. I've never seen this before. I'll be the first to say, and I think you'll hear that from a whole lot of other, hey, security practitioners, nerds and geeks, and folks that do what this industry kind of asks for here. But they've shared, they've showcased, they've published everything that they can here and made it real. But Marcos, I'll be the first to say, I don't know all of the ins and outs of this, but what does that mean? Okay, whoops, the hackers are going to be the one kind of snitching and being the telltale here. There's an incident and we're going to tell the SEC.
Yeah, so John, it's really interesting because I think just like you covered it, and we've seen that ransomware tends to hit on three ends, right? It's your computer is encrypted, you don't have access to your data. They also exfiltrate the data, so you technically should pay once to get access back to your systems, twice to allegedly delete your data, and the third one is for reputation, right? So we don't go tell. And I think that's been we've historically seen that. I think to your point, what we've seen now is they're taking it up a notch, and it's just not we're going to put it out there and say we got you, but we're also going to tell somebody who has actual oversight and an actual stick to come after you if you don't disclaim these type of things that are happening. So I think they're really just upping up the ante here, and it's really going to be kind of a double whammy for companies, right? I think there's these SEC rules that are coming up. They may not be fully enforced. I believe is late or mid-December, where you have 4 days to disclose. So I think this ransomware gang may have, got a little trigger happy there, but still, right? I mean, we're talking about 2-3 weeks before that happens, and they're still, putting them out there. And I think we're going to see a whole lot more of this. And it's our push for transparency. And if you think about it, that's been always one of Huntress' core values. And it's not that an incident happens. An incident can happen to anybody. It's really how you react, what you do with it. It's even that life philosophy is like, it's not you can't control what happens to you. You control what you do about it. And I think this is just really going to put a lot more pressure for companies of all sizes, from small, medium businesses to publicly traded companies that need to be at the top of the maturity scale, to have their plan ready and have their everything. Because if this happens, you're going to have 4 days to disclose to the SEC. And remember, these huge things that happen to public companies, be it financial, be it that something happened to your management team, something happened to your bank account, you got, like, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be cybersecurity, but that's the topic of today. You have a ticking clock of 4 days to go disclose. So I think this is just going to mean that readiness for these type of incidents, it's just going to be key. It's not optional that, we'll admit that something happened, we'll figure it out, it'll take our time, we'll engage the right people, we'll talk to our attorneys, but we'll just take our time. No, now you got 4 days. And I think, as with everything you see with technology and compliance, the standards somehow get set at the Fortune 500 publicly traded companies, and that tends to flow down. So don't go thinking that because you're not a publicly traded company, that, well, that's for the big boys, we don't have to worry about it. This will come down to everyone. The moment you start working for a Fortune 500 company or a publicly traded company, they will most likely want you to have the exact same response time if you have their data, if you have their contracts. So aspirationally, if you're an SMB that wants to do some work for a publicly traded company, this will become your problem too.
And it's wild to me, because what I wanted to drive home on this is certainly, I think, something that everyone kind of recognizes and remembers. Oh, ransomware is a threat. Yeah, of course. But that is on, to some level, just the device, like just the computer, just the hardware. The endpoint is kind of the word that we say. But if I may, I also kind of want to split that, because the risk, the threat, okay, whatever cyber incidents and however they happen, whatever form, shape they take, it's not just, and we see more and more now in today's world, it's not just the endpoint. It's not just the computer itself. And if I may, I'd love to get into some of that real talk there, because it's also people. That's also us, like human beings. Like, identities are a really big thing that I think we're starting to chat a little bit more about. And that, sure, we know, oh, computers can be hacked. Yeah, okay, electronics devices, technology can be vulnerable. But the same thing goes for us as people. And I think we chat a little bit about that with business email compromise, or, hey, maybe your cloud identity, your provider, whether that's, oh, Microsoft 365, or I don't know, stuff you do in AWS or Google Workspace, even Okta, etc. You interact with everything through certain cloud and online systems. So there's even more of a threat if, hey, I don't need to hack your computer, but if I can get access to your online accounts, to your email, to your calendar, to your OneDrive, to your SharePoint, to your Microsoft Teams, or I don't know, Slack communications, whatever it might be, that can still open the door for one thing, a whole lot of juicy data that threat actors and cyber criminals can take advantage of, and more from there. But we riff on a whole lot here because, look, we tend to say it's not a matter of if you're going to be compromised, because some organizations might just shrug it off. They say, why would hackers ever go for me? Maybe you're in that boat. Maybe you're not. I don't know who might have that perspective. But it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, if someone goes after you. It's a matter of when, because oftentimes those cyber criminals will spray and pray. They'll go after the low-hanging fruit, whatever they can land a hit with, whatever fish they can catch. That's all they're going to keep running with. And that might just be you, whether you're caught in the crossfire or not. And it might not even be, something like a target. They might not even have a sophisticated goal or objective. They might just be trying to milk money wherever they can, and stuff falls out. And that could certainly be any of us, us included.
John, quick question for you. Is
Yeah.
it worth one thing that I think it's always good to demystify is, the difference between, call it harpoon fishing, which is, we're after you because you're XYZ and really, versus, fishing with a giant net, just like massive fishing, and how this is automated. So you don't really have to be anybody. You have to be alive and have some sort of digital presence to get caught, because a lot of stuff is automated for what I understand, right? So it's not we targeted you. You just happen to, spray and pray. It's just like we just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, right?
Absolutely. And it can take a whole lot of different shapes and sizes, whether, it's some silly email attachment or it's some phishing link. But no, I really wanted to drive that point home. It's spray and pray, and it is, as you mentioned, automated. I don't know if folks or other nerds and geeks may be listening in, but you hear of TrickBot, maybe a bit of an old one, or QuackBot or Emotet, where they could send out any of these phishing emails or one initial access vector to get them a foothold into the environment. And maybe they'll just sell it to someone else, to some other hackers, to some other cyber criminals. So they can then carry out with their ransomware or their defacement or start mining cryptocurrency, whatever the case may be. But it is in mass. And that's not, I don't mean to make that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, gloom and doom, the sky is falling. We want to chat about, hey, what we can do to protect ourselves. But I do want to bring that to the table. Those real talk, cold hard facts, what the landscape looks like. What do you think, Marcus? Am I barking up the wrong tree here?
No. I think you're absolutely right. I guess my point, John, here is the incidents we see. We serve small and medium businesses. We monitor, over 2.5 million endpoints, and none of these endpoints are in a Fortune 500. They're not in a Russell 3000. They're not in publicly traded companies. These are doctors' offices, your dentists, like you name it. There's really small SMBs and some larger ones too. But for the most part, when we see incidents at companies, what I'm trying to drive here is that this just doesn't happen. Even if it only makes it to the news when it happens to the big companies, this happens every day to tiny companies as well. So I think the big point or the big message to drive here is you are never too small to be a target for a hacker. So really, it's all about preparation. The best thing you can do is prepare from a technical side, but also from the financial side and the company side. And what we try to do here today is kind of give you beyond the, okay, I need X, Y technology. This is what my security stack needs to be. All those things, absolutely. To John's point earlier, this is the endpoint. This is the technical piece. But again, this is going to happen eventually. So what are the other things you need to have ready and understand and prep for? And if there's one thing that I've always liked to say in life in general, is like, you got to dig your well before you're thirsty. And I think this is what we're trying to tell you, all the things that could happen, not to scare you, but to educate you and make sure you're prepared.
I love it. Let's maybe keep it moving, because you are pulling on the right strings on, okay, what does that cost? Not even just money, not even just finance, but I think there's a whole lot more that kind of comes underway when cybercrime is up in action. We were chatting a little bit about business email compromise, and this is some cheesy, hey, statistics and numbers and metrics and all. That's, again, something you just have to throw in some PowerPoint presentation. But I think there is some really interesting insight in there, because it shows just how seriously we have to take it. Just how much potential loss there is to it. And Marcus was just mentioning, like, look, even for maybe a smaller mid-market business, it's not going to be Fortune 500 enterprise even, but you put those in mass, as we've discussed, that can crank up to a pretty penny. I don't know exactly, what will hold an organization for ransom for, but you certainly see across the industry, across the landscape, how much that all adds up to be. What is it, over maybe almost 3 billion? That's 2022. I'm still curious for the 2023 numbers when we come to it. Um, of course, constant onslaught of attempts for incidents, for, hey, trying to send out those phishing emails, hey, trying to drop that malware on an endpoint or reach out to some individual. And a lot of the time, it is targeting you. And I say you as in the person, as in, or anyone. Hey, tech worker, engineer. Hey, someone just, I don't know, accountant. Hey, HR individual trying to open a resume. Whoops, turns out that document maybe macro enabled some way or another, or was a shortcut link to something else. And that was the payload. But they're just doing their job because they have to look at these, incoming resumes from applicants, right? Really weird and really wild to see some of the tricks and techniques that those cyber criminals could get up to and the impact that comes from it. But Marcos, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep rambling. I would love to hear really your laundry list of all the stuff that this, all the puzzle pieces that can be affected here. Because sure, we can talk about, yeah, the money cost of a ransomware bill, but what about the downtime, reputation, insurance, etc.? I'd love to let you run with it.
Yeah, of course, John. And I think this is a great exercise. And this is, we have a decent amount of time here to talk about this. And I realize that we're all operators, right? We close this webinar, we go back to like the next goal, the next thing you got to go, you got to knock out that to-do list, and we don't stop to think, what if, right? And so let's take these few minutes to do a quick mental exercise. Imagine today, and let's actually not even talk about a ransomware incident, because that can trigger a lot of fear, a lot of things. And I hate driving messages based on fear. It's more education. So just imagine that just power went out, right? Your power went out today. You have no access to your computers. All your employees showed up at work today. And you know what? The power will come back in 24 hours. But there's absolutely you can do in the next 24 hours to run your business. It's just you're down. What do you do, right? Whatever things you produce, whatever services you offer today, you can't. You're done. You can't tell your employees, "Oh, I'm sorry, power's out. I can't pay you for today because it didn't work today." Right? You got to call your customers and say, "Hey, whatever thing that I promised you for today, that order, that deliverable, any of those things, I won't be able to deliver it. And I promise you, even though it's absolutely not your fault because it's the power company, they're still depending on you. And they may be on the other side of the country. They have no idea. All they know is that this provider, that they were depending on, did not meet their commitments. So regardless of the circumstances, imagine just a scenario like that, but maybe the power company comes back the next day and say, you know what, it's actually going to take 3 to 5 days. So this entire week, sorry, you can't work. So as you go through these type of scenarios without the fear of like, oh my God, there's an attacker, there's a lot of other things that come with ransomware, but just going through that exercise of what happens to you. Are you going to be able to collect the money from those contracts? Is that going to delay things? That's just on the very operational things, right? And again, remember, you're not getting revenue. You're still paying your employees. You still have all your fixed costs. But then beyond that, right? Because you can blame the power company, and that's an easy one. But when there's something you could have done in terms of protecting yourself, and maybe with the power example, right? Like, well, if you're prone to those type of things, why don't you have a generator? Why don't you have a power plant of your own, depending on your size, right? And that's the type of argument you make of, whoa, why didn't you protect yourself enough? Because remember, sometimes the counterparty, the person that's pissed off because you didn't meet the requirements, they don't care if you did enough or not. All they care is that they didn't get their thing when they were supposed to, and you don't know where you're going to be able to get it to. And that's what leads to the reputation issues, right? The next time you try to use that company, that customer as a reference for your next customer, they're going to say, well, I don't know if your data is safe. Whatever you send them, that already happened. It's not your fault. You were doing your best, but it still happened. So it's not, well, screw it, right? It's going to happen, so might as well not do anything. Is how do you minimize it? Remember, it's outside of your control whether it happens. It's how do you respond to it, and how do you get your act together when it happens. And like John has on the slide, it's your current customers. They may get pissed and they may say, hey, you know what, you didn't meet your commitments, so I'm going to terminate the contract. Um, Believe me, that customer is not going to be a happy one, so they're not going to give you a good review for your next customer. And even on vendor partnerships, there may be some data going back and forth with the people that provide you services, and they may say, you know what, that's a little too risky. We don't really feel like that organization can be trusted with their security stance. Let's just, pick our customers and decide not to do business with them. That's on the reputational side. And then on the legal fees, remember, we're just literally talking about sort of like these external parties, customers and vendors. But then there's legal fees. Like it's not the power example. We're just literally just sitting on your hands, waiting for the power to come back. This is a crisis. You need to go engage insurance companies, legal fees. You will be doing a lot of stuff just to even figure out what the hell happened. Because the first question is going to be, well, how it happened, right? Let's avoid it happening again. And that doesn't happen in an hour, in a day. John can give you detail on how long these things can take. And sometimes there's questions that will never get answered. Like I said, delivery of product services, that's the main thing that people are going to be pissed off because they hire you to do your job and you can't. And then insurance, right? It's not just, oh, well, I have insurance. They'll pay for that, right? Sometimes not. I mean, if you've done with insurance companies before, they will try to see where is this outside coverage, where is this, beyond what they're supposed to do. And even when they pay, they will say, well, fantastic, we paid you, but we can't really renew your policy next year, or we're going to renew it at 5-10 times the price. And believe me, in the last few years, we've seen insurance premiums go up. Well, because insurance companies have had their challenges as well, trying to underwrite and price what is the cost of these risks, because that's the problem. And how John said, it's a cat and mouse game. And every time we come up with a better mousetrap, then they go back to the drawing board. And that's the challenge of this industry. But it's a risk that we have to deal with. And again, the message here is going through the list of these things that could happen. How would you react to it? And preparation and education is the only true weapon that you have against hackers here.
It is something to think about. It is undoubtedly something that, hey, we got to pour that time into prepare ahead of time. And I say that because, so hey, I'll be the first to admit, I wanted to maybe get some anecdotal stories, not just from us, like Huntress proper, because hey, truthfully, we're a vendor, and that's I'd maybe want to give you something more realistic and more comfortable, relatable to you. So hey, we asked some other folks, we asked some other organizations, and this was just a quick, hey, off the cuff, spontaneous thing. But I said, do you have any of these horror stories? Do you have any of these nightmares? And I'm sorry, I know I feel like maybe we're walking a little bit of a tightrope, because I do want to say, not all doom and gloom, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We're not teaching by fear. We do want to get, and I promise we'll get to some of the education for some more tactical stuff, but it boils down to the time and preparation. Because if we really take a look at some of those stories, this individual was sharing, hey, maybe a client, a customer asked to dig into a virtual machine or a device that was down. Turns out it was ransomware. Again, maybe a little bit of the endpoint scare here. But that meant trickling out to everything. That meant some of the lateral movement. That meant some of the maneuvering around the organization. We're trying to get them calling insurance. Hey, this affected group and the organization. Takes them about a day to figure out who to call. That stuff isn't kind of written down, part of their process, or they don't have their own incident response playbook for this. It takes 2 more business days and a weekend to figure out what we're doing for that incident response team, for who we're working with. And then more days of confusing back and forth, trying to figure out who is in charge of what and when we have a green light to even begin the recovery process that has not been tested prior, because you don't think about this stuff until something hits the fan. But that's what we need to do. Basically 2 full weeks of a complete operational shutdown. So maybe that puts a little bit more of a metric to it. And I will go out on a limb here, but I don't think it's too far to say that's on the lower end of the time necessary. Because I chat with some other folks, and hey, they had an incident. Again, maybe some more of the nerd and geek lingo here. This was the Cobalt Strike, hacker tooling and cybercrime software, but that beat them up, and they were this organization and the folks affected were maybe down for a month, maybe even two, maybe a little bit more, dealing with that IR team and insurance. Lost some hours of operational time, money that should have been coming in for the org, and that took time. But all of this can hopefully be mitigated and at least have some more stop gaps in place or the protections and mechanisms so that this doesn't have to be that nightmare scenario or that horror story. But I wanted to share some of that in case that added at least a little bit more of the, okay, fine tune metrics and anecdotes, at least from folks that have been through it. And maybe some of you tuning in, maybe you have. Maybe you've already worked through some of those nightmare scenarios, but we're working to make sure we don't have more of those on the way. With that, there is hope. And some of that hope, some of that help that we can kind of bring to the table here. Can I ask you, Marcos, what is your first pitch? What is your elevator spiel or recommendations? How can we better protect and not have so much risk and financial impact, even in other regards, when something hits the fan?
John, I would say education is the first thing. Being here at this webinar and then following up on those things. If you're listening to John and me talk about these things and a bunch of ideas start popping in your head, just write them down and get back to those. Because that is really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get you to think about this thing now that you took this downtime from the craziness of running the business, to think about these things. And you may not have all the answers, but pick up the phone and just think, if I got hit today by an incident, who would I call? Call your insurance company, call your broker and be like, hey man, everything's fine. This is fantastic. But if hypothetically I was hit today by an incident, ransomware, who should I call? Should I call you? Is it somebody else? Are they 24/7? Can I get their number? Just leave it somewhere. Start that prep work. Educate yourself. And the problem is, John and I can give you the general things about, how it works, hackers, the big things, but John and I cannot give you the number of that person that you should call if and when something happens tomorrow. So that's the second part of the education that is completely up to you or your team. Don't feel like you need to know it all. And if you know it all, then you suck or life sucks. So you might as well not do anything. Call your team. This is probably the time to go test your team and how ready they are and ask them, hey, again, same question, hypothetically speaking, we just got hit by a ransomware. What's the first thing that you would do? What's the first person you would call? And start having that conversation. That's probably the biggest thing that can be done today. Right now, this is when you start digging your well. And then start working through the technical stuff, right? You have a technical team, or you are a technical team, regardless of who you are. Start going through the detail. And I know there's a lot of tabletop exercises that are out there to really start just play it out. I mean, there are huge organizations, the government, the military, usually run these things, and there's a lot more exercising than actually fighting because of that, because this is the time where you're not actually under fire, when you have the time to really think about it. The adrenaline is not there, the stress is not there. This is where you have the chance to go and pick up, like, I don't know, your top 10 contracts and be like, hey, what would happen if is there language here? Do you need to put language in your contracts to say, hey, you know what, if ransomware happens to us, whatever? Really start having those conversations with your insurance brokers, your attorneys, your accountants. How much cash do you have in the bank to, face a lot of these things if there's no more money coming in and you're having to spend a lot of these things? These are the things to start preparing from a business side before you even go start thinking, what type of technical solution do I need to do these type of things? And go talk to experts, because you may be a technical expert, you may not be a cybersecurity expert. We also talk about those things. And I'm always going to stress the point that you don't have to know it all. You have to have the phone number of the person that knows it.
Marcos, I am super duper glad that you were alluding to it and then you said the words tabletop exercises. But I know it's something that people kind of roll their eyes at. I think folks might groan and that, oh, it's another boring tabletop exercise. So, if I may, I think maybe one cool resource that can help folks start the conversation and start to think on this. If folks are familiar, there's this game. There's this activity, there's this exercise that, hey, Huntress, we kind of got to contribute and help out with the little expansion deck. But there's this thing called backdoors and breaches. And I really, really recommend that you take a look, maybe go Google, I don't know, kind of do some research, see what the heck that thing is. Backdoors and breaches is literally a card game, but it's trying to take a tabletop exercise, but put it into a more accessible, fun, engaging, interactive way that gets into real tactical stuff of like, okay, threat actor got in by a phishing email, but then they started to do some lateral movement with whatever techniques. And you've got your engineers, you've got your techs, you've got those nerds and geeks to think of, oh, do we actually have the protections for this? So you can think about that technical material. But we also know, oh, hang on, word just got out on our incident, and now we're the headlines front page news. And whoops, a reputation is shot. Who are we going to make these calls to? Who are we going to discuss with? And it is a little bit of trial by fire. It is trying to recreate that nightmare doomsday scenario, but so you can get out in front of it. And I know, Marcos, you were kind of mixing in some of that military pitch here, and that look, you train like you fight. Like those tabletop exercises are a godsend in our preparation, and it is preparation as it should be. They say this cheesy thing, oh, practice makes perfect. And that's why you go through these iterations over and over and over again. So let me charge that. No. Perfect practice makes perfect. And that's why we have to get this right. And that's why it's worth digging into those. And if folks aren't familiar, I would really recommend backdoors and breaches. But with that, the rest of my soapbox is the stuff you've heard us screaming and shouting forever. And I feel like that's such a boring answer, but it is those bare bone basics, that cybersecurity hygiene. We have a lot of words and text up on the slide that say, oh, cybersecurity is better in layers. And we mean that in, oh, your host firewall, your host antivirus, your network firewall, oh, that VPN, oh, that email filtering, oh, that EDR component, oh, hang on, that security awareness training. Wait, don't forget our cloud protection. You think of these like Swiss cheese, and that's a silly example, but analogy that we hear in a whole lot of industries. Look, it is in layers because the Swiss cheese has holes in it. There are some gaps. There are things that we need to fill in. So what if we put more Swiss cheese behind it? That still has some holes, right? Because nothing is completely 1,000% silver bullets unhackable, as we say. But then you put another layer. So those holes get filled and those gaps get covered, and we start to stack in different places. And that is defense in depth. That's one of those thought leadership words we tend to hear and say. And the frameworks and guidance to help with that, if folks aren't familiar, I hope you don't mind. I want to be spitting out some resources. NIST cybersecurity framework, NIST is a huge one, but the real way to get tactical with that are the CIS benchmarks and CIS controls. That's the Center for Information Security. Maybe a little bit more homework or light reading if folks are interested. That is a really, really great tactical thing to dig into. How do I harden my computer? How do I make sure my system and security is as strong as it can be? It's going to take a little bit of that time, but that's the preparation. So forgive me again, I'm rambling, Marcos, but what do you think? Is there anything we can kind of bring to the table to help?
Yeah, of course. And that's the beauty of that. And this is what I was alluding earlier in terms of you don't have to know it all. We don't. I mean, look, I'm the CFO of this company. When it comes to something extremely technical, when it comes to security research, I reach out to John. I'm a former nerd. I used to be an electrical engineer 25 years ago. I could not even fathom to try to pull a line of code here these days. And even if you look at our own internal department of security, we have probably 5, 6 different flavors of people doing different types of security in any way, shape, or form. Just highlighting the fact that we know a lot about security. That's our expertise, especially for small and medium businesses. But we don't have one person that knows it all. And what I'm trying to drive for you in the audience is you don't have to. You don't have to go become a cybersecurity expert tomorrow, and it's probably going to take a few years. So until then, you're completely unprotected. You don't have to. You probably have other things. You're running a business. You really want to focus on whatever it is your business does, and a lot of that comes with HR and hiring and trying to find financing and trying to find new customers. That's where you should be focusing. Or even if you're a technical team, you're in a team. You have a lot of things happening on your networking side and your endpoints and all those type of things that are not security related per se. Let the experts take care of a lot of these things. And this is where Huntress is a resource for you on the education side, but also on the actual solutions that we offer for your endpoint, for your identities. And one thing that gets overlooked a lot is the security training part of it. A lot of these incidents happen with just somebody clicking on the wrong link. And that was it. And there's no technology that's going to be 100% foolproof for those type of things. So having your people prepare, and also prepare not just with one of those boring training videos from 35 years ago when you're probably falling asleep as you're watching this corny things, but it's security awareness training that is engaging, because to be honest, the first line of defense is going to be you and your people not clicking on the wrong link, but also preparing for when things happen. Because again, it's we strive for perfection, but the one thing that we can't forget is progress. How do you progressively get better and prepare for these incidents? It has to do with training. It has to do with the right tools to protect your endpoints, to protect your identities, like Microsoft 365, and attending these type of webinars to educate yourself to know what could happen and what would you do about it. But I'm sure, John, you can give a little bit more detail on the technology side and how do these things like our MDR solution and MDR for M365 and SAD kind of play along to fend off the shady hackers out there.
Oh, well, hey, I'll be super duper quick because I don't want to turn into some commercial by any means. But look, I think when we see day in and day out a lot of these case studies, there's one of my favorite stories to tell, and it was quite a big deal because it was literally advanced persistent threat, like an APT, hardcore hackers, the stuff that people writing crazy stories about. But we had a trialing partner, someone that was coming to hang out with us, and we can protect you, we can help. And we found and uncovered, there has been a threat actor lurking in the environment for a year. And they had an antivirus, they had some software mechanisms in place, but it was kind of sleeping on the job because this advanced persistent threat had sent a phishing link and an email downloaded attachments that was a password encrypted zip archive for some of those files that folks are familiar with. And there was this macro enabled document that, now led to some of that information espionage. Hey, they're listening on your computer browser tabs. So what you're doing surfing the web, or your keystrokes, a little bit of a keylogger, trying to steal and siphon information slowly, stealthily. But it's wild because we're on the phone with that partner, with that organization, and they, that they're going through this, understanding the impact of this that has been lurking for a year or so. And they start to think, well, what all does this touch? How much does this affect? What VPN, other communications between different headquarters or office spaces? So we get to then share with them, hey, we're protecting the endpoint because of all the analysis we've got to offer here. And whether or not this gets into some larger environments like Microsoft 365, we've still got your back. And that poor user that, hey, saw that phishing link, got that email, we should hook them up with some of the secure awareness training, maybe get some of the education and info that can help them so this doesn't happen again. So there's that threefold try triple approach. But that is that security platform, and I hope we can help, because that's the whole point. Hey, we want to help you sleep at night here. With that, I've been rambling for a long, long while, but I think we're looking good on time, my friend. I don't know if we got any opportunities for questions. If folks did want to bring us something a little bit more tactical, maybe personal for you. Do we have any questions in the queue? I thought I saw one.
John, I think there's one asking, how do legal and regulatory consequences factor into the overall financial impact of a security threat? And I think that's great, because it's really getting into like, all right, cool, you got hit, now what? And especially on the legal and regulatory. I think on the legal side, it could really go in two ways, right? It could be something along the lines of something very clearly defined in your contract that says, if your data gets stolen, or, you're not able to meet these specific things, I can terminate the contract. And guess what? If my data gets stolen, I can go after you for damages. Remember, if you have your client's data and that data is proprietary, it's confidential, and you were found negligent about your cybersecurity. Remember, and negligence is it's a tricky term, right? Because it's really going to get down to like what somebody could have or should have done, a reasonable person. And then that term reasonable, this is obviously getting to court and all those things, but attorneys will argue back and forth. Did you reasonably protect yourself, or were you just like, whatever, who's going to come get me? I just have their data on my Dropbox, and I'm not going to put 2FA on my account. So who cares? Nobody's going to come get me. Nobody knows me. There's that, right? There's those damages. There's that gross negligence that could be behind that. And then the other one, it could be, and that could cost you money, because people could actually come after you for the damages you caused for not being responsible with their data. And especially if you didn't quite read the contract and what it means. And this is why it's important to talk to your attorneys. The other part is, they could be able to get out of the contract because you didn't perform, right? I don't care whether you got hit by ransomware, or the power company didn't give you power for 2 weeks or a month. I needed my thing by tomorrow, and I have my own customers waiting for what I produce with the pieces of the services you're going to produce. Remember, this is it's a domino effect of the things that happen downstream. So just on the legal side, they could terminate that. They could also come back for damages for all the things they couldn't do, their lost revenue. It could be a lot of things, right? Imagine it's it's a car accident, right? It's not just like you injure somebody. It's like, could they now go to work for the next year or so? It's all those, downstream consequences. That's just on the legal side. And regulatory really gets into, are you in a regulated industry, right? Are you in healthcare? Think about HIPAA. Are you really taking those extra steps where you actually may be on the hook for other things, where either your state, your local, or your federal, government could really come after you and shut you down because you weren't following the regulatory framework that you're exposed to. So when you go down to that, really, I'm going to be the money guy here and say, as I'm listening to myself saying a lot of things, I'm just hearing a lot of dollars going out the door in attorney fees, and potentially getting you out of business, or really setting you behind a lot on all the hard work you put into your business because you didn't take the proper steps to protect yourself. Remember, nobody's ever going to come back and say, how dare you get ransomed. That's not the point. Is, how dare you not protect yourself reasonably, because these are risks that are out there. And I think 30 years ago, you could have said, well, we're not NASA, we're not, the Department of Defense, we don't have anything. Everyone's got something out there, and you can see it in the legislation, where even a lot of these requirements are out there for all sorts of companies. And the more this happens, the more it's going to come down to the small and medium businesses, no matter what you do, no matter who you do work for, no matter what kind of data you have. You can see it in the privacy legislation, where if you have customer data of any way, shape, or form, you're on the hook for protecting that and being a good steward of that data. And it really just comes down to, honestly, data care. what do you do to protect the data? We talk a lot about the endpoint and your ability to operate, but it's the data where the real value is. If there wasn't data there, yeah, you can just go get another endpoint access to data. If you knew the data is safe, it was an exfiltrated, and you had access to it. So I think that's my soapbox on legal and regulatory, especially in financial, because all these things in the end, it just cost money. I hate being the bean counter, but you go after the money. You understand a lot of the motivation of a lot of these ransomware gangs.
All right, I'm keeping an eye out. I don't see too much more piling into Q&A or chat. We'll give it just a moment, but hey, thank you so much, everyone hanging out with us. I hope there was some good insight in there. I hope there was a little bit of sound bites, but this has been a real treat, and I hope the education and at least some of the awareness, and that's the most especially important part, I think, in my mind. I'm not sure to speak for you, Marcos, but I think making sure folks are aware is the best that we can do to keep up the fight.
Absolutely. And John, I think the last thing is, I'm going to say this again, because probably you're looking at the clock. You're like, it's 8 minutes to go. Maybe I'm going to go grab a bite and then go back to whatever I was doing before I jump at this webinar. Those things you wrote down, you should go look into it before you get to your next meeting. Your next thing, type out a real quick email, Slack, whatever it is, action it. Let somebody else know that you're thinking about this thing. Get the ball rolling. Even as small as it is, get thinking, take action. Don't just sit on it and say, oh yeah, I took some notes on a webinar 6 months ago. They're just sitting on my desk, whatever. Maybe I'll find it when something happens. Just get the ball rolling, get people thinking, and that will create the movement, the inertia. It will be the inertia, to get thinking about these things. And you'll find the resources that John gave you earlier. That'll get you thinking. It'll really open up your mind and get educated more on it.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I don't want to cut you off, but it does look like we have one more question. So while we've got the time, let's tackle it. David C. asks, do any of these attacks break in through IoT devices?
Ooh, super good question. So hey, if folks aren't too familiar, acronym IoT should be Internet of Things. You think of, smart devices, your smart fridge, your smart camera looking at, I don't know, your front door or your yard, or smart watch, whatever. You just prefix smart to anything, and then it's some Internet of Things device, sort of, kind of. This is traditionally like the Wild West of security attack surfaces. Oftentimes, a lot of Internet of Things devices have their firmware or have a lot of their specifications just kind of out on the internet in the ether that can be very, very easily reverse engineered and find its own flaws or vulnerabilities, like telnet is still running and okay, they can get in, blah blah blah, or the default credentials, like the default username is just never changed. So short answer, yes, an IoT device can certainly just as easily be an opportunity for a foothold, initial access in the beginning of a compromise. Oftentimes you have to think about the exposure, like, is that thing publicly facing on the open internet? And if it's not, okay, it's some component of a network. Maybe you move to it some other way. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to get too nerdy, but I can't say whether percentage one way or another, is it more likely to go through an IoT device or not. I would at the very least say it is part of the attack surface and something to be cognizant of, especially when we're trying to layer and add up our security posture. We also want to limit and minimize the attack surface. So think about what is critical infrastructure, military term of your key cyber terrain, or cyber key terrain, kind of cheesy. But those are things to keep in mind, I think. Marcus, what do you think?
I mean, I think that's it, right? It really gets down to understanding what the landscape is of your infrastructure, right? Anything that it's connected to your network can be a vector of attack. And John's point, it's not as easily understood or regulated. And you have a lot of these vendors that They're just trying to think about it. They're small companies, they're startup, they're trying to get product out, they're trying to get that product market fit, they're trying to potentially get investors, so they're trying to ship something. And if you're shipping a smart thermostat or a smart doorknob, like whatever it is, a smart door stop or whatever it is that we're trying to connect to the internet these days, they're just trying to get that functionality, that utility out. And unfortunately, security can be an afterthought when you're trying to prove that the next smart doorknob works. And it's happened to be companies. I mean, Ring had a huge issue, and think about it, Ring got bought by Amazon, and that wasn't last year, that was a few years ago. So again, it's just being mindful of the devices you have connected to your network and the risks. Risk reward, that calculation, it's just thinking about every time you add a device, there's a benefit to you and there's a risk that comes with that. And you just need to understand it. It's not do it or don't. Just be mindful of the risk you're taking and stay on top of that. Maybe you need to go find another provider for the same type of device because they are more security oriented. It really, it's your mileage may vary with these things, but it's always very much specific to your situation. So just like we can't tell you who to call if you get hit by an incident tomorrow, but you have the power to go do that and start writing down those things. Maybe this is one more thing you need to write down on your notepad. Hey, do we have an inventory in all the devices that we have in our network? Check every IP associated with your DHCP server to make sure that you really know which device is which and why is it there. Ask those probing questions. That this is your job, and part of that is knowing what's in there. And if it's not, start asking questions. And is this the most safe device we can have for this type of feature if you absolutely need it?
Well, hey, thank you for the questions. Thank you for the engagement. And this has been a real treat. But Cody, I'll let you wrap things up here.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you for talking nerdy to us. And Marcus, thank you for supporting that. I really appreciated having both of you on the show with us today. So thank you so much. So I'd like to remind our audience that our session today was recorded. You will be receiving that recording via email here shortly. However, you can also find it living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars, and you'll find it in the on-demand section. The two winners of our $50 Amazon gift card drawing will be contacted here shortly, and we'll be selecting those winners randomly based on those who engaged with us today. So thank you all so much for your participation. I'd like to thank Huntress for sponsoring our program today. Once again, I'd like to thank Marcus and John for joining us as well. And to our audience, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you spending the past hour with us, and we would really just like to ask you for one more moment of your time to fill out a survey that's pinned to the top of the chat. If you don't mind clicking that, it won't take you more than a minute or so. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, Marcus and John.